and we'll be monitoring that. So with that, welcome. Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to be discussing today on this webinar about creating a more unified community college. And specifically, we're going to be talking about how we can break down the silos between non-credit and credit so we can better serve students and get them on track. So welcome. My name is Cynthia Farrell. I'm the Vice President of the Texas Success Center here at the Texas Association of Community College. We're so excited that we had so many people sign up to be a part of this webinar. In fact, we had to change the format a bit just to accommodate everyone. And so we've got a lot in store for you. We hope that it'll be a nice interactive time. We invite you to participate and to share, particularly with your chat. And so with that, I just want to give a quick start. I know we had this resource. We're so lucky to have folks from ESG be on this webinar for us. I know you had a chance to look at this document that they have, this research that they've put together. It's going to help guide us in our conversations about how we can integrate idea around non-credit and credit and integrating that with our guided pathways work. So just before we jump into all of that, what I'd like to do is first just see who's in the room. And so with this, we're going to do a poll, and this will be a practice for us to also use the polling feature on webinar. So with that, Ellie's going to pull up this polling question and just let us know who you are. We'll know who's in the room and who we're talking with. So if you're attending this webinar today, are you from Continuing Ed, a leader there, from Credit Workforce Programs? Go ahead and just click whichever one best describes you. And if you have to choose the other, you're welcome to use the chat to tell us more specifically who we have in the room that we'll be discussing this with today. And with that, I'll just ask Ellie.
Yes, ma'am.
How the poll coming in and how we can see the results from the poll.
Yes, so I am waiting for, we have 64 out of 71, so 90% have voted. I'll give them about 5 seconds more here, and I'll end this poll and see. So if I go ahead and end it, these are the results. Can you see them?
I can. This is really interesting. So we want to make sure that we all know how to talk with each other and where we're coming from, and understanding that continuing ed and credit divisions have coordinated with each other, and we want to make sure that those of you who maybe have been more involved with the pathways work or less involved, that we invite everyone into this conversation. So it is very interesting that we have 38%. The highest number is other. And so I think that with that piece of information, I will just be sure that I will be clear about trying not to use acronyms and being clear about the different models and how we're trying to integrate them. So we welcome this opportunity to really be an introduction, that we all get on the same page and have a good conversation about where we're headed next with this work. So thank you so very much for sharing that information. And we will move then to a little bit of an introduction then to the Success Center. So some of you have worked for a long time with us. We're about 8 years old here, but since we might have some new people in the room, very quickly, I will just share that the Texas Success Center's mission is around equitable mobility. And so here at TAC, we are definitely dedicated to the social and economic mobility of Texans, and that we will do that equitably across all student groups. The center in particular is charged with bringing coherence to the student success agenda. So prior to the Success Center coming to be, there were colleges doing all different kinds of efforts to improve student success. And our charge was then to have one model that we all used together and encouraged one another. And so with that, we are using then the Texas Pathways strategy. And that strategy is about getting students directly to their end goals, which is careers and further education. So this conversation that we're having today around credit and non-credit, particularly workforce education, is so timely and fits so very well with our strategy. So for those of you who haven't seen our model before, this is our Texas Pathways model that we use in every single institute that we have. So twice a year, we have institutes where all 50 community colleges who are committed to this work come together. And we use this critical framework for scaling student success. And so it's not like we've come up with new solutions, but rather that we are looking at the student's experience as a systemic one piece of fabric that the student experience is guided by. And so we start with the end in mind, and this model helps us start with the right-hand side about looking at student success and aligning program outcome requirements for success, targeting those career pathways and employment, particularly in key occupations, and clearly mapping out the path for students to get there so that they are progressing, and looking back to when they enter, how we're helping students to explore their options and making their plans so that they know from the beginning exactly what courses that they're going to be taking and what services that they can take advantage of so they can get to their end goal as quickly and directly as possible. At the beginning, then we also look at how we're connecting not only just to high schools, but better connecting with adult ed programs and other onboarding options. So this is the model that we've been using for this is our 4th year of working with all 50 community colleges, scaling out this model. Now, this is a different kind of poll I'd like to take. This one, using your chat box then at the bottom, let me know, have you ever been to a Texas Pathways Institute? So turn on your chat and start chatting, and you can just put yes or no, and we can see the chat box going up. And Ellie, I'm going to ask you to give me a read because on my screen, my share screen, then I don't have the chat.
Sure thing. So it looks like we're getting quite a mix, Cynthia. We have a couple, I would say we have more yeses than nos, but we definitely have quite a few nos, not to say that. We have a person that says they've been to 5. That's great. Carol Haynes from Navarro.
Beautiful.
So,
okay. And we'll, I found the chat. So sorry, everyone. I see Galen, who's been to all of them. Shout out to Austin Community College. That's awesome. I know there are a lot of folks across around our state that have been to all of them. Thank you, Ellie, for that. So then let me then just say a minute then, since we had some no's, I'll just very briefly touch on what our 4 pillars are that guide our work of the Pathways work. So every college that comes to these institutes then is committed to scaling out essential practices that are related to each of these 4 pillars, that we're mapping paths to students' end goals, we're helping students choose and enter a program path, that we're keeping students on the path, and then we're ensuring that students are learning. So each one of these pillars has some very specific essential practices that colleges are even, there are some colleges in our state who have integrated these 4 pillars even into their strategic plans, which is an excellent example of the ways that the colleges are knitting this into the very fabric of their system so that we can better serve students. So we have always been committed to helping as many Texans as we can. And then the pandemic came, and I will tell you that it put a new spin on what we're doing with our Guided Pathways work and a particular focus. So when we knew we went into COVID, we knew there were many more people that needed us than we were reaching. And so we started this TRUE initiative, and TRUE stands for Texas Reskilling and Upskilling Through Education. And I want to pause just for a second and show you an introductory video on our TRUE initiative.
Cynthia, if I could have you stop sharing for just a second. Thank you. Hopefully this is visible to everyone.
Yes, I see it.
Texas community colleges are vital to the state's education and economic recovery goals following the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2019, community colleges served approximately 750,000 students.
Oh. Apologies. Here we go.
Texas, like the nation, is rebuilding an economy devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Unemployment in Texas has nearly doubled since the pandemic began. And over 3.5 million Texans have filed for unemployment insurance. Texas businesses have also been hit hard, and many are facing a challenging road ahead. Now more than ever, Texans seeking work will require the skills needed by employers in a rapidly changing economy. As the current provider of 92% the career and technical education credentials in Texas, community colleges are a true skills contributor and best positioned to reskill and upskill Texans in need of good-paying jobs. The True Texas Reskilling and Upskilling Through Education Workforce Initiative aims to accelerate Texans back to work at low cost to the students. Colleges working within their communities will deliver needed skills and build high-demand career
Okay, Ellie,
pathways and
I think we're going to have to
credentials.
stop the video. I don't think it's working.
I think it may be because we have a lot of participants, Cynthia, but I'm happy to put the link in the chat so everyone can view it on their own time.
Please, I appreciate that. So I can go back to mine and tell you that what we did with the True Initiative was that we realized that 3.5 million Texans went on unemployment insurance. We already had skills gaps and a need for workforce education from our community colleges to be the solution. And we knew that we could swing into gear fast to be the solution that our state was looking for. And so this is the model that we've been using to communicate what we're doing with the True Initiative, that we wanted to focus closer on adult students and displaced workers. And we wanted to provide them through the community colleges, so both through non-credit and credit means, these career pathways and credentials that were built out but in close collaboration with our Texas employers so that we could choose key occupations and really target those occupations to offer very short-term career pathways. So we're talking about weeks to less than 6 months that Texans could come in and upskill and reskill very quickly and get into a job that is a good paying job and that the community needs. And that they would always know that there is further education, that they could come back to the community college and stack those in a way that they don't lose any credit in doing so. And they can get a new credential and be eligible for another job with higher paying wages. So that's our Texas upskilling and reskilling through education in its nuts and bolts of the practice that the community colleges will be working on. So this is an overlay of True and Pathways. So you can see up there at the top, the Connect, Enter, Progress, and Succeed. These are the buckets that the colleges are already working on to improve student success. And so what we're doing now to really focus in on these workforce credentials is that we're saying that these are learners who come from lots of different places. And so we look further than just at getting students from high school or people from adult ed, but also looking into our communities and helping them to come in and easily shop and select career pathways that include industry-based certifications within the meta majors that we're already building out and the career clusters that we'd already been working on in our pathways work. That those students can then onboard with a very clear intentional completion plan, take these stacked pieces of some non-credit, some credit courses and get this credential in less than 6 months, gain the skills that you need and the work-related experiences. So we're talking about apprenticeships and internships and ways that we can work really closely with employers so that as soon as they get that credential, then they can get to work. And completing those credentials in those key occupations. So we're talking about using more labor market data in our selection of key occupations and courses and making sure that we are serving our communities well. So that's our True and our True Pathways work that we're going to be leaning into even coming into this next year. So very quickly, I'll tell you some things that are already kicked off. We have a True Workforce Initiative that started in January, and we have these 12 colleges that are basically a proof point for us, that they're doing some work about identifying high priority credentials, about designing or redesigning and implementing high quality short-term and micro credentials aligned with regional demand. And they're creating some maps. And I'm going to give you an example of a map that's like what they're creating. One college is creating. So the phase 2 will start this fall, where we're going to include all 50 community colleges using the institutes that we have with our Guided Pathways work to leverage business and industry partnerships and utilize the Texas Pathways strategy to help all 50 community colleges scale this kind of work. So that's where we're headed together. Here's an example of what Dallas College is doing. So shout out to Dallas College. Thank you so very much for having this true pathways in practice. This is a map for a logistics technician. And you can see they have Fast Track CE there on the left that is stacked with a level 1 certificate, and then stacked on top of that an Associates of Applied Science where no credit is lost. And so a student would start with this dark brown Fast Track CE set of courses and credentialing, and they would be eligible to get an industrial truck and tractor operator's license and get a salary of about $35,000. So maybe better than they were without any credentials, but definitely not a stopping place, right? We want them to then stack on top of that a level 1 certificate where they could bump into new careers and to a median salary of $62,000. And again, for an associate's degree for a transportation storage and distribution manager's type position. So these are the kinds of maps that we're going to be asking the colleges to work with as we begin to really lean in and support each other in the ways that we're blurring the lines between credit and non-credit courses so we can best meet the needs of the students and our communities. So we have a true partnership with Amazon. So this is an example of what we're doing here at TAC. And we're going to be making more of these programs, curriculum available to all colleges. So what I want to ask you, and more to come on more employer engagement, right? And how we're trying to support you as a statewide level so that we have more employers engaged on a statewide level through our institutes. But as we transition, I want to know, we're going to take another poll, our last one from me. And as you think about the work that you're already doing at your institution, how integrated do you think you are right now? How would you judge your institution going into this? Do you feel like non-credit and credit are integrated well together in your Guided Pathways work that you're doing, if you're familiar with it? And what about like dual credit? How is that integrated in? Or adult basic education? Do you feel like you're doing a good job integrating all those pieces into one systemic solution for students? And so with that, I'm going to stop sharing so Ellie can put the poll up. How well do you think you are integrating adult education, continuing ed, continuing ed and credit, CTE, and dual credit programs with your Guided Pathways work? Is that happening not at all? You're in the planning process. Maybe it's partially integrated, or maybe you're full on integrated.
I will share the results as soon as I see most have voted. Ten more seconds here.
Very good. So the group as a whole feels like we're partially integrated, but that we still have some work to do. Maybe there's 3% fully integrated. We need to know who that is so we can learn more from them, and 5% not at all. So it looks like we're mostly planning or partially integrated. Thank you, Ellie, for doing that. I think this has been a fun test of how we use polls to have sort of the silent participation. So I hope that you all have enjoyed that. I've enjoyed learning more about you all very quickly. And so with that sort of Texas landscape of where we are and how this whole conversation is situated in Texas, I'm going to turn the floor over to our friends at ESG and ask them to take us into their workshop. So thank you, Brett.
Thank you, Cynthia. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brett Visger. I am Senior Director of Post-Secondary Attainment with Education Strategy Group. And just really quickly, if you're not familiar with ESG, we are a mission-focused consulting firm really focusing on trying to improve educational outcomes, especially for underserved populations, all with the goal of increasing economic mobility. But last fall, we released a paper that was shared around with all of you ahead of time about a more unified community college, which is about strategies aligning to non-credit and credit programs. Now, one of the things that I've got to add, the link to True is really evident and will come out through this. And I have to admit, I'm going to show my age because I went to high school, or I graduated from high school in the 80s. Anytime I heard True, I kept thinking of the Spandau Ballet song. And I'm not going to sing it for you. But this is recognizing that credentials are good, especially for folks who are reskilling. The data show degrees are better. And in many institutions, non-degree credentials are housed solely in the non-credit side of the house. And to the extent that we create barriers and challenges, are important to find ways to address, to build those functional pathways like Dallas College shared in that. If you can go to the next slide, please. We were fortunate to receive funding from the ECMC Foundation to do this. And we spent a year really mining around the country and trying to understand what are practices and functions, the credit and non-credit, who's doing what across the country, and all of the key pieces. We did over 50 interviews from a qualitative standpoint with folks, really trying to understand who's doing what and really focusing on regional and institutional diversity and looking at all of those pieces. And as we looked at this, we did in-depth site visits at 5 places: Prince George's Community College, Hartford Community College, both of those are in Maryland, Monroe Community College in Rochester, and the Kentucky Community Technical College System, and Salt Lake College. And the folks in the red, we put together a advisory group that helped as we worked on formulating this through. So why did we do all of this? If we can go to the next slide. Part of this is, and this gets into duplicating a little of what Candace was sharing, but as we were looking and trying to talk about practitioners, trying to really understand the differences and where pathways fit and where non-credit and credit come together. And next slide, please. And throughout all of this, we also recognize that we can't ignore the contextual piece of the pandemic. And what is critical to recognize that, as everyone well knows, millions of people were displaced in the pandemic career-wise. But the folks who have been the most displaced are people with less than a college degree. And so high school and less have seen some of the greatest levels of unemployment. And they're the folks that have, and again, this is what True is trying to do, recognize there's people who are in economic crisis needing to get training to reconnect. Next slide, please. At the same time, we also recognize the role of race is a significant one. Where non-degree credentials fit, there has often been a history of lower labor market payoff and some lack of progression for students of color. And there's been some history of tracking students of color into non-degree credentials over degree programs. Part of what we're really concerned with is trying to make sure that everyone has opportunities moving on and building the strength into the earning power of degrees. non-degree credentials are really positive programs at labor market outcomes. The data show that over time, degrees will have better career progression. So to the extent that we can help, some folks are going to just stop with a non-degree credential, but we want to be able to make sure that we're able to create systems that maximize for students the opportunity to go on and progress to a degree. Next slide, please, Annie. So some of what we found, and this is not going to be a surprise to any of you. The division between non-credit and credit is significant and severe. So there's programmatic differences. And what's fascinating is how many colleges offer certificate programs on the credit side and the non-credit side. Exact same, leads to the exact same certification, but there's no articulation agreement between the two, and where that fits. And as one of somebody talked about when we did interviews, value determination, even the term non-credit is fraught. Like somebody, how do you say it? Nobody wants to be known as non-anything. So while it is a valuable component, it's not necessarily valued in the same way within the institution. Stakeholder differences between students and student experience and faculty and staff. People have a real perceived stratification of recognizing, there's a lot of places, non-credit students don't have access to the gym. They don't get a student ID. And there's other places that charge different fees. The structure's really different. Getting into operational differences, funding and financial aid is really different. While there is Title IV aid for non-credit programs that are of a significant level, it is possible. Most places don't offer it because it is a pain to file both a non-credit and a credit piece for Title IV, and you have to be over, I think 600 clock hours. So they're longer programs, but there are fewer financial aid opportunities. What's the student advising that goes into students for non-credit programs? Is it the same, or is it even like how do you make sure people know that they're making good informed choices? And technology, where that fits. But now to the interactive portion of our program, I want to kick it to you all to ask you all your opinion, trying to see these big buckets, programmatic differences, stakeholder differences, or other. From a poll, we could launch the poll, please. Which do you see as the biggest barrier for alignment of these programs? Okay, we're getting close on responses.
Yes, so we are currently at 60%. So I'll give people another 10, 15 seconds here. All right. So these are the responses.
Okay, so operational differences seen as really the biggest barrier. Interestingly, as we went around the country and talked to folks, there was a universal recognition, or at most colleges, people said, yeah, we really dove in quickly on the faculty side and the curricular side, trying to understand where this fits, and made great progress. And after the fact, we started to engage the registrar and the financial aid office and the advisors. And there was as much, if not more, work that had to be done on that front. And so that was a really big takeaway, to make sure you're focusing on that. Where does this all lead to? If we can go to the next slide. A call for change. So systems start for good reason, and it made sense to have a quick, nimble part for students, but it's clear that having these parallel bifurcated structures hurts students, is not productive to business. They don't know who to talk to about and where all those values fit. So it is an imperative for institutions to start thinking a lot more critically about how they can work to align this. We can go to the next slide, please. So what we want to drive to is to invite you in, and we want to ask you to envision what an institution that prepares students with skills and knowledge and continuously grow. How can you look to align the growth and credentialing of students from workforce and degree programs to seamlessly interface and move on to each other? And so my guess is that up till now, the things that I said, everybody's like, all right, good, gotcha, we're on board, but what's next? What does this mean? So from what we've seen, there have been places that have made significant moves, and I'm making a guess, seeing that map from Dallas, that Dallas has made some significant moves, and looking at the responses, you all, I'm sure, are on your way, and this is building on success. So if we can go to the next slide, what we're trying to do is put forward kind of a framework to think about all of these pieces. And so the first part is really looking at a framework of treat all students as students. Really, whether it's on the non-credit or credit side, look at reducing the gaps in student experience, services, and supports to each group, and trying to think about moving away from stratification of non-credit and credit, like just the terminology of where that fits. Number two is clear pathways. This is where the true maps are going to be really critical, and this is making the on-ramp connections for folks so that they can clearly understand where this fits. Two pieces tied into this. And before I joined ESG, I was in Ohio for a long time working at the state, and looked at the data about how people move and stack. And there is, on the non-credit side, often a very strong cultural belief, and we heard it even in our interviews for this. People just want to come and take the program and get a job. That's all they care about. And then when you look at the data, that it's true, they want a job, but there are more students that swirl and continue to take courses than you think. It's often around a quarter of the students, whether coming from a non-credit side, taking credit. Are they taking the right courses? How do they move on? Understanding where this fits. But I think each person on the non-degree credential side should know two things when they finish: what job that can help them get, and what's the next step in their educational pathway, and how they can get there. Looking at the next framework is about aligning governance and departments. So this is trying to move through having joint curricular leadership, trying to have shared conversations about integration of where faculty sit, and a lot of times, depending on the department, there can be somebody who teaches a course on the non-credit side and somebody who teaches very similar program on the credit side, but they're not necessarily recognized. How do you get that governance, curricular, faculty, and stakeholders at the table? Then thinking about this part of recognizing that programs should be either credit worthy or credit based. If they're not offered on the credit side, making sure that there is clear pathway to recognize credit. This becomes an institutional choice on the best way to go about doing this. There are some places that have said, we're just gonna not do any non-credit programming. And then there are other places that say there's value in having it. We're going to have the faculty review it and bless the program for credit and make sure that there's a clear pathway. And then the last bit is to remove barriers to transition. And this is all about making it simple for students. To what extent, when you ask people to transition, do you say, okay, take this form, go down the hall, go talk to this person. How seamless is it to move these things forward? So back to the interactive poll component, if you could launch the poll, please, which of these elements resonates the most with your institutional framework context?
So we'll give everyone 20 seconds more if you haven't voted.
Okay. All right, so building pathways between non-credit and credit credentials. The part that I guess this raises a really interesting question for me, which is on the previous bucket, the operational side, not the programmatic side, was cited as the biggest barrier. So it raises some interesting questions about the how and where those pieces fit. Next slide, please. So trying to get to the implementation concept, like how do you take this framework and begin doing something with it? And from our reviews and site visits and all of this, we broke it down and recognized 4 strategic starting points. And this is only meant to be a guide, and you're going to find things that resonate with you at your institution. You're going to have to do your own institutional approach that fits. But the first strategy that we're trying to talk about is removing the structural divide. And this is about creating a new or merged division that encompasses both the credit and non-credit programs. And one of our panelists who will talk later, oversaw just that approach, trying to see about putting everything under one bucket. And this is about shifting systems and procedures to facilitate student alignment and progression through these things. And then really trying to have it present as one unit across the institution. Caveat to all of this, somebody on the academic side who might be in the humanities, this is really only in where there's alignment in workforce related programming. So humanities departments wouldn't all of a sudden be merged with workforce departments. So it would more be along the lines of, where does IT on the credit side and the non-credit side fit together? Strategy number 2 is looking at credit-worthy programs when and trying to have bridge tools to award credit. So this is, by bridge tools, what we're often meaning are things like credit for prior learning, building clear pathways and agreements up front so that, again, there's the faculty review and crosswalk and credit matrices, so that even though it's offered on one side of the house, the other side knows that students coming with this can quickly leverage and get X number of predetermined credits. And this is, what's important is trying to move this so that the credit awarding is as automatic as possible without additional hoops for students. Number 3 is really trying to make the majority of non-credit programs become credit bearing. And Kentucky Community and Technical College System really focused on this and trying to figure out that how all of the programs fit, how they stood them up quickly to be responsive to business and industry, where this all aligns. And again, from my experience in Ohio, there was some less robust funding for non-credit programs. So the rational act for a lot of community colleges was, we're just going to make everything credit. So there were some community colleges that had no non-credit offerings because it didn't pay for them to do that. Then the last strategy is reorienting around pathways for emerging and interest demand. And so this is driven by external drivers, trying to look at, again, I'm going back to the Dallas example. I'm assuming there a large part of that is driven by the labor market need for people in the logistics industry. And so how do you be responsive to the logistics and figure out what the employers need for skills, what is the business asking for, and where this fits. I'm going to, so those are really that's the broad overview. If we can just very quickly go to the next slide, and the next slide after that. This is embedded within the playbook itself. Rather than go into all of this, it's really suggesting, don't take forever to plan, get started, do something, and think about this, I think, as a continuous improvement and ongoing process. You've got a wonderful resource with the True Initiative and Texas Association for Community Colleges working on all of this. If we could just skip ahead, Annie, we've got, we're fortunate today. I'm going to move into kind of a facilitated conversation with, and we'll have time afterward for Q&A. And because I can see there have been really good comments and questions in the chat. But we have some panelists, some folks who have been grappling with this. And before I really dive into that, I want to acknowledge my colleague, Annie Phillips, who has been so dutifully moving these things forward. She played such a key role in pulling this all together, and has been really helpful in all of this. But we have two panelists. One is Dr. Christine Barrow, who is recently the former dean at Prince George's Community College of the STEM division and oversaw a lot of this. And the reason why she is recently the former dean is she has now joined ESG as a staff member, bringing her perspective on a lot of this. And William Gary, who is the executive vice president of workforce community development at Tri-C Cuyahoga Community College in Cleveland, Ohio. So what we're going to do is have a little bit of conversation and then get around to open it up to Q&A. So I'm going to open this up both to William and to Christine. Can you talk about how your prospective institutions or respective institutions worked on aligning credit and non-credit divisions, and why? Why did this, this isn't something that you wake up and just say like, I'm going to do this.
Christine, you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I will say, and good afternoon. I wanted to say, I think a big piece of why was a nexus of circumstances. We had some changes in leadership. We were working on guided pathways. There were a whole host of other things that were going on at the same time, some strategic planning. And this was an opportunity for us to do something really bold and different to serve our students, something that hadn't been conceived of before. So there was an idea that was floated around, just put it all together under one umbrella and we can better serve our students. And as we go through the conversation today, I'll tell you a little bit about why at face value that sounds great and it does work well. The devil's in the details, so to speak. And so it becomes really important to work out those nuances along the way.
So I like Christine, will start off with the why. About 6.5 years ago, when I joined Tri-C, I was asked to completely restructure our workforce development division. And the president, Dr. Alex Johnson, saw that we were doing a disservice, not only to our students, but to the business community and to the community at large by having this bifurcated system of credit and non-credit. And so as a result, we did a lot of examining of what does that mean to our enrollment, our student completion, student success, generating the quality of skilled individuals to meet immediate business needs and or to afford those individuals alternative pathways that could lead to transfer to four-year institutions as well. And so we adopted this policy, this frame of mind that says it's not about a degree, it's not about a job, it's about both. And so how do we develop those internal systems to develop that? And I'll get into some more detail regarding how we have done that, what systems have we put in place, how have we restructured not only my division, but the entire infrastructure of Tri-C to create that one door aspect for our students.
Well, I'm going to probe for a second and let you continue, William. So at the core of this was about really reimagining what your institution and non-credit programs could look like. So what were the criteria that you established for quality, and where this all fit within determining and creating a center of excellence?
Well, that's an excellent question, Brett. And when you talk about this bifurcation, many of us in the workforce side are always faced with the notion that what we do is less than, not only in terms of quality, but encroaching on what I call always the pristine halls of academia. And so when you begin to talk about integrating and combining programs and operations, there's always this pushback that this is going to have a deleterious impact on our credit programming. And so we had to diffuse that. We did a lot of that by examining data that supported the notion that we were losing students who traditionally would come through one pathway, let's say the workforce non-credit pathway, only to fail and to completely drop out and not avail themselves of another pathway. And that's the traditional academic pathway. And so we created something called a one door policy frame of mind, that when a student comes to Tri-C, you come through one door. And that one door will assess your abilities and capabilities to determine which pathway you should pursue. And should you pursue a pathway and not be successful, there are alternative pathways for you to pursue, so that we capture the student, we retain the student, and we afford that student the opportunity to complete whichever career objective they desire to choose.
Excellent. Sounds like a fantastic approach. And pivoting to Christine, I know that your efforts at PGCC resulted in the development of a new area, which is the Department of Teaching, Learning, and Student Success, which was an equivalent. It was a new division. It was equivalent of a lot of other existing divisions. And so what catalyzed this change? How did it help you?
So I will say that, as I mentioned before, a big piece of what catalyzed this change is guided pathways. We were one of the first 30 community colleges that were selected to do that guided pathways model. And it was a really big eye-opening opportunity to look at how we serve our students, what student success means for us as an institution, and where students want to go when they enter our institution. So we took, if you think about PGCC, we have nearly 40,000 students, but of those 40,000 students, only about 12 to 13,000 of them are credit students. It means the majority of our students are actually not credit students. So what we needed to do is to make sure that we were serving all of these students, helping them meet their end goals. And so we took the opportunity to say, one of the best ways is to take the best of both and put it all together. It was really important for us from a structural perspective not to make it look like academic affairs was absorbing continuing education. This is about creating something new that can better serve our students. And I will say that when we first started it, it was a little wonkier at the beginning. There seemed to be the impression if we just put everybody under one vice president, it'll all work out. And that's not enough. And we learned that really quickly. And so what we then ended up doing is trying to realign the realignment because we really needed to better integrate the structures so that it was a more seamless structure. But the big piece of this, the reason why, was about guided pathways. We saw that we had students in our continuing education that were pursuing some of the same credentials as our credit students. Why did we have to be serving them different? Here are opportunities for stackable credentials that we hadn't been leveraging up to that point. So we really wanted to do things differently and really focus on student success. And for us, student success was all about helping them meet their end goals, which is one of the key core principles, as you heard, about guided pathways.
So Brett, if I might follow up with the same trend that Christine shared with us. We had to create buy-in on both sides. It's easier, as Christine indicated, to just merge workforce or credit under the academic leadership, if you will. We decided not to do that because, as most of you on this call understand, a lot of what we do in workforce and continuing ed has some different elements to it. We're driven by, in some cases, revenue. We have to pay our own way, if you will, so we're self-sustaining. Industry is looking for just-in-time responses. And so to just roll everything under one umbrella was just not the way we chose to do it. So we decided to create what we call centers of excellence. Those centers of excellence combined the strengths of both academic and workforce programs, where the pathways would be a normal trajectory, if you will, from non-credit to credit enrollment, and to convince our credit brethren and sisters that non-credit programming could drive enrollment to their programs. So we did a lot of crosswalking of curriculum. We did a lot of data analysis to determine which programs provided not only enrollment strength, but were designed to meet the immediate needs of our business community. We got our business leaders involved in this whole process and began to map how this would evolve so that we then established what we call a co-governance approach to this. So in my case, for an example, we've established 6 centers of excellence. Those 6 centers mirror what we believe to be the driving elements of our economy. So those 6 centers, for an example, relate to manufacturing, hospitality, healthcare, police, fire academy, or what we call public safety, creative arts, because Cleveland has a significant creative arts industry here. And those 6 centers had to comply with certain criteria. For an example, it's not just to create a center, but that center must address a key area in which future job growth is expected. It has to be a key supplier of skilled workers for local employers. It has to enroll a large number of students year after year and demonstrates a high success rate. It has to offer innovative education programs, having a broad impact on the region, using state-of-the-art facilities, and receiving national recognition in the field. We decided that the co-governance would include the executive vice president of workforce, that's me, as well as a senior leader of our academic program, most notably one of our campus presidents. And we did that so that the college could see that this is a collaboration, it's co-governing, and both sides have input on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. And I can get into more detail a little later.
Great. Just wanted to point out the efforts that they both talked about trying to align. We talked to some institutions where there were some faculty that had been trying to do this, and faculty were very clear on one side or the other, and not in a happy way, where there were non-credit faculty who said, we feel like we're being taken over. And then there were people on the credit side that said, we feel like we're being taken over, depending on where it was. So the attentiveness that they had to where that fits is really critical. Now, I also have to ask the very, very obvious question of the moment, which is, what did COVID do to these your efforts, and how did it tweak or cause for any kind of adjustments?
Well, I can start that off. Like all of us, COVID just completely derailed a lot of our activity. Pre-COVID successes resulted in almost overnight completely shutting down our operations that impacted both our on-ground credit programs, on-ground non-credit programs. things like welding, for an example, things like STNA, things like our police and fire academy had to almost completely shut down. So overnight, we had to completely find ways to pivot from on-ground delivery to remote delivery. And so within a period of about 3 weeks, thanks to a lot of the creativity and innovation of our faculty and staff, we were able to convert and pivot almost over 200 of our programs to a remote delivery. But notwithstanding that, we were very, very concerned about the disruption of some of our programs that required the completion of clinicals and certifications, where most of our students in those programs had achieved almost 80% completion. And so to completely shut down was not going to only disrupt them, but the businesses that were looking to hire them. So we immediately deployed PPE, social distancing, like a lot of our institutions have. We spent an inordinate amount of time remodeling, restructuring our classrooms, our labs. We had to shorten class delivery times, sessions. And at the end of the day, we were able to add some continuity, albeit not at the scale of a pre-COVID environment, but we were able to add continuity to even our truck driving program, where we actually put shields between the instructor and the student. Now we're coming out of it. Like most of us, and I'm sure you're doing the same thing in Texas, we are relaxing some of those rules based on our state guidelines and, of course, the CDC and others. And we now are restricting spacing to, instead of 6 feet, 3 feet. We still are encouraging the use of masks internally within our classrooms, but our ultimate goal is to get back to a full complement of enrollment so that we can continue to serve not only our students, but the businesses that we are engaged with.
And if I can add, I will say many of the experiences that we had were very similar to what William shared. In addition, we were in the midst of the actual realignment work. And so it created some challenges associated with that. It also opened our eyes, or maybe I will say reinforced some of the challenges that we already knew existed. For example, many of our continuing education courses, those courses didn't have Blackboard components. They didn't have access to our learning management system. And while you might just say, give them access, it'll work out fine, that meant the students didn't know how to use an LMS. The faculty, the ones that weren't already also teaching credit courses, didn't know how to they didn't know how to use an LMS. We had to be able to reach them. Our continuing education students didn't have PTCC email addresses. And so how do we connect with them? So we took a pretty big hit in terms of enrollment. And then we had to realize that this is something that further reinforces why we have to do this work. It made it even more relevant. And so what I will say is, while it created some enormous challenges, we met those challenges and we looked at it as an opportunity to serve some of our students in new and different ways. William was sharing some of how you can create some of these very in-person type courses and still find a way to either do it remotely or do it safely in an in-person format. So we got real creative, like many folks around the country did, in terms of how we could still help the students progress toward these credentials, continue those operations. There was a little hiccups along the way, but it really opened our eyes. And there's some dirty laundry in there too, realizing that, oh, we got to get these credit classes back up and running. I just said that most of our students are Con Ed students, so we really need to get them back into classes as well. So there's an element of that in there, that it just, again, reinforced the importance of the work. So we had to just double down on it.
What was really eye-opening for us was the dichotomy of what drives revenue to the college when you are, from a credit standpoint, depending primarily on student enrollment and tuition. and students are now not being afforded that education. We lost, as a result of this, $25 million. And we had to lay off some people. We had to establish a voluntary separation plan. And most eye-opening was the fact that our non-credit students had to completely figure out ways to now engage in those student services activities and support mechanisms that were historically and traditionally afforded only to credit students. So we had to outfit our non-credit students with computers so that they could pivot from on-ground delivery to remote delivery. It was a tremendous eye opener for us, but we were able to do that. We had some challenges, as Christine indicated, a lot of hiccups. Traditionally, students now are faced with, I can't continue to operate this way and still take care of family members who now have been impacted by COVID. So we had a lot of stop outs, and we are trying now to recover those students and still take advantage of the world that we live in today. And part of that is remote delivery. But it impacts both non-credit and credit. And that further fueled the importance of these centers of excellence and integrating credit and non-credit programming, not just for the delivery part of it, but student support services, the fact that many of our students aren't afforded Pell Grants because of the way Pell Grants are structured. I could go on and on and on about some of the barriers that we had to face. But hopefully we're coming out of this COVID short of this variant that we're facing shortly.
Thank you. Really important responses. I want to pivot to us asking Christine a question about a strategy that you all implemented, and 70% of your IT courses are cross-listed as both non-credit and credit. So same class, students sitting next to each other. Some of them are credit, some of them are non-credit. Like, how'd you do it? What have been the benefits to the college and the students as a result?
So one of the first and most obvious benefits is that there's no question about the quality of the education. Sometimes faculty, we can't give them credit for this. We don't know whether they really learned it the way they were supposed to learn it, those types of things. That eliminates that. It's the same instructor teaching the same course. It's just two different populations of students. So we didn't have to worry about that because it's a cross-listed course. It opened up new credentialing opportunities, I will say, for our students, because they hadn't really realized that I could go further. I've got this interim success. I've completed this credential through the continuing education. I can do college. Now let's see what comes next. I'm sitting right here next to credit students. We're doing the same thing. We're both successful. That means the door is open. And now maybe I can consider doing something different. I will say the reverse has also happened, where we've got some credit students who are like, I'm on this path to this associate degree. Man, that looks like it's a long ways away. Can I get something right now that can help me get a job so that I can continue a better job than what I have right now, so that I can continue to support my family? So it opened the door for these new credentialing opportunities. The other thing is that it reinforced that sometimes when we want to offer a new program, I'll use a good example, Amazon Web Services, the cloud services. When we did that, it takes time to navigate a credit curriculum development process. So we can offer it in Con Ed. Some credit students can enroll in it because it's a cross-listed course. And then the door is open for all kinds of new opportunities for the students. So new delivery modes, I think also, it opened the door for new delivery modes between our courses that we hadn't considered. And just to be honest, new faculty that we had not, we're always short on faculty, particularly full-time, but part-time faculty as well. So we now have a new cadre of faculty who in many cases have work experience that we can draw on, that they can bring into that classroom to make the work come alive, the topics, the content come alive for the students. And so it created a lot of opportunities, and really it helped others, because we do this cross-listing, it helped others at the institution realize that as we're tackling this integration and the creation of this teaching, learning, and student success, it's working there. How can we make it work for us in these other disciplines? And so it kind of opened the doors, so that now we're looking at cross-listing some of our construction classes. We're looking at cross-listing health classes, where there's a variety of other disciplines now that are beginning to take advantage of it as well.
Thank you, Christine. We've had a whole spate of fantastic questions in the chat, so I want to make sure we get to them. So I'm going to pass it to Annie, who is the mistress of question keeping.
Look out. I'm actually going to start with the last one that just came in, because I think it's a general question from Shelley. Can you two share a little bit about your strategy for doing an inventory of options for students between non-credit and credit? How do you begin to map that?
So I'm going to give you a relatively short answer, and that is to create a list of all the courses that you are currently offering. We asked for that originally, and they gave us a laundry list of everything we've ever offered, and so we needed to refine our parameters there. The other thing that became necessary is trying to figure out how to align where these things would fit, where these courses would fit. And I'll give you a good example. So we offer courses that are focused on credentials, but we also offer personal enrichment courses. So where do you put those personal enrichment courses? They're part of a very specific seniors program. So should that be part of, let's say it's in a foreign language, in a world language. So do we put the French course do we put that with the rest of the world languages? Where do we want to put that? So we needed to create this inventory to figure out, here's all of our course offerings, all of our program offerings, and just start figuring out where do we put these things. Again, Guided Pathways kind of helped with that, because we already started mapping everything to meta majors. And so once we started mapping everything to meta majors, it became a little easier. And then we truthfully just kind of restructured our academic divisions around some of those meta majors. Not exactly, but pretty close. Even our department structures supported that.
And we did something similar, particularly using the meta major approach and model, and trying to decide how best to align that with student needs, which now brings into the fold this whole concept of counseling and advising. And by the way, we disaggregated personal enrichment courses in this process, and I'll share that with you a little later. But the counseling and the advising piece was critical for us, because historically, our workforce students were advised and counseled by the respective program managers of our workforce programs, as opposed to the college counseling and advising group. And so through this Centers of Excellence concept, we now have this one door approach where counselors for both credit and non-credit are treated our students the same. So you come in through one door, and based on your abilities and capabilities and your assessment of your strengths and weaknesses, we try to direct that path for you, and not be so concerned about its workforce or its non-credit. I'm sorry, it's credit. But we did not include personal enrichment courses. That group of courses are part of our community education program. We've kept that separate. It's primarily designed to address those needs for people who just want to do personal enrichment. But there's also an opportunity for those individuals, whether they are below 55 or above 55, to migrate into other programs that they choose to select.
Thanks, William. And there was a question about the advising system at Tri-C, and I know you guys have a very sophisticated system for that. Rebecca Salinas was asking, so just to get a little bit more specific, are there general advisors for everyone, or are there specific advisors tailored for certain students?
A combination of both. The more general we wanted to make this, the more inclusive we wanted to make it, so that we could dispel any notion that people are favoring one program over the other. It should have been, and it is, based on the students' needs, our assessment of where they are, how college ready they are, what are their levels of proficiencies. If you want welding, why, and what are your assessments for determining if that's the pathway. That in and of itself was a process that was a very difficult process to navigate. Our counseling and advisors typically are more prone to academic counseling and advising with no real in-depth knowledge of our workforce program. So we had to make that transition and make that more of an inclusive process. That's still a work in progress, but it affords Tri-C the opportunity to centralize advising and counseling under a one-door process. I will also add one other quick comment. We have something called the first year experience, and I think Texas has something similar to this, where students, regardless of the entry point, get an opportunity to test the waters, if you will, by getting a feel for both credit and non-credit programming through this first year experience. And then if successfully completing that program, then they get credit for that program that can then be transferred to a credit bearing program.
Excellent. Thank you for that, William. Another general question. So our framework does, make a recommendation around creating joint leadership. Christopher Nelson had a question, just kind of, do you agree, disagree, and why? Is it sort of a necessary first step to, put academic affairs and continuing ed, sort of non-credit and credit underneath the same VP to successfully integrate and do this work?
I don't think so. Maybe later on, as this bifurcated governance structure evolves, and people get accustomed to, things are working very well, and we've dispelled this we-they concept, that may evolve to a one focal point. But I think the way we're structured now, it gives both sides of the house an opportunity to buy into the effort and buy into the outcomes for our students. The critical piece for us was that this was not driven by me. This was not driven by the academic side. This was driven by the president of our institution, who said, if we're going to be successful as an institution operating in an inner city environment and affording equitable, diverse, and inclusive opportunities for all of our citizens, most notably people of color, we're going to have to do things differently. We're going to have to operate our businesses differently. And everybody's going to have to pitch in on this, and everybody's going to win. And if, by the way, your enrollment programs in the academic side are not yielding the butts and seats that they should, you run the risk, by the way, of that program being eliminated. So there are some incentives that would induce a lot of us to pitch in on this bifurcated governance structure.
And I'll just weigh in. I will say, I mentioned that that's what we did, is we aligned everything under a vice president. Culture matters, and making sure that when or if you choose to do something like that, you've got a clear idea and a clear vision for why this is happening. If that's not clear, then folks start to question everything. And so we were able to align everything under one vice president. Question becomes, is it the vice, because you don't want to hire somebody brand new who has resources for that. You have two vice presidents. Which one are you picking here, kind of thing. So that's why the clear vision becomes important. We did have great leadership from the top saying, here's why we're doing this, and just continually reinforcing this is about how we're serving the students. It just so happened that when we did this, we realized, okay, that's not enough to just put it all under the same vice president. We're going to have to do more if our ultimate goal is that no wrong door policy. As soon as you walk in the door, we know exactly how we want to support you. So for us, it was an important first step, but it was not enough to do that. I will chuckle just a little bit about the moving train comment a little later on down the road here.
Well, I did want to ask that next, because Christina's right. You know, the change can feel like boarding a moving train. So how do you, so what are your recommendations to help institutions maintain quality operations during that time period? And she does have very specific questions about, do you start new processes on break? How do you do this work and keep the trains moving at the same time?
So I will share that the trains moving piece becomes really challenging when you're working with two different systems. So the easiest example I have is we basically have almost two registrars. We have Cindy, that, God bless her, if anything ever happens to Cindy, everything Con Ed goes away. We have no idea what happens because she's essentially the registrar for Con Ed. And so what we needed to do was to take a look at processes. We needed to understand, what is the process for this? What is the process for that? How do we create synergies, but still respect the reason for why that process existed? We decided one of the things we wanted to do was one application to the college. And with some conditional logic, it can drive you in different directions based on how you respond to questions. Well, our Con Ed, we usually do something close to instant enrollment. You show up 2 hours before, click a couple of buttons, you're registered for the class and ready to go. How do you do that with a one application process? So it became really important for us to map out processes, make sure we had identified who needs to be in the room, and be afraid to fail just a little bit and iterate. Okay, so that didn't quite work out exactly how we planned it to. What do we need to make some changes on? So we had to do a bunch of that along the way. It just became really important to be open and honest when things aren't working, but also to be willing to change things. You don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, just because it didn't work. Let's iterate on it. What could we do different to get us closer to what we're trying to envision?
And ditto to everything that Christine just stated in terms of processes, dual registration processes. We had to, I guess, address all of that. But I would also add that it's important, at least for us, to, on this train, having left the station, to have periodic stops to reevaluate, reassess, where are we? Are we achieving the outcomes that we had anticipated? What are the challenges and issues that we're addressing? Who should be addressing those? How should they be addressed? What resources will be required in order to not have the train derail, if you will? And then the accountability piece, I think, is critical. One person in this governance structure can't be the sole person that's accountable. It has to be dual accountability and an understanding of that. And then at the end of the day, how is performance measured and what does success look like? So we had to deal and address all of those things up front and get buy-in to all of those criteria.
Okay, so we're getting close on time, and part of our challenge is we have more questions, good questions, than we have time to fully address. I think the big question we want to put back to you, and we would love for you to do short answers into chat, which is, okay, we threw a lot of information at you, but also recognizing that and based on the poll, many of you are started or thinking about this work. We're not starting from square one. When you get back to your home institution, what is something that you're going to try to do right away? What do you think is important to start trying to do? If you could drop answers into chat. What will you do next?
And Brett, while they're doing that, I know I could probably speak for Christine. We would like to know, has this been helpful? Have our experiences been helpful?
Like that's a new poll question.
Or
So
should I,
for-
or should I
for
not
one
show up in
response-
Texas?
More discussion and time, aligning pathways, inventory.
I will say one of the things.
Yes to the helpful.
One of the things that I think was helpful for us as well is language matters. So we talked a little bit about language, the non-anything, it's common. We use non-credit. We get used to that. But the other thing is when we were working on this effort, it was keeping our eyes on the prize, these fabulous students and what they want to do with their lives, and how we can contribute to that was really important. It made some of those really difficult conversations just a little bit easier. When things start getting heated, let's bring it back. Why are we here? So that it kind of levels the playing field of sorts. The other thing that we did is this wasn't always about converting students from a Con Ed student to a credit student, because there were also opportunities for our credit students to take continuing education courses. And so anytime we were having conversations, we were looking at bi-directional paths for students. There are multiple on-ramps and there are multiple goals that students can pursue. And so that became a pretty important part for us, is where there are other opportunities. I can get CPR while I'm on the way to being a pharmacist, that kind of thing.
So there are such a range of answers in this. It's hard to go through them all, but I'm sure people are looking at it. But the one part people have, to William's question, does seem like there has been a general consensus that it's helpful. And there are lots of important starting points. Annie, if you would pull up screen. One of the things that we'll share with you as participants, we're going to email this out to all of you, identified fantastic points. This is sort of a reflection worksheet that we're asking you to have a look at, share with your colleagues, engage with people beyond just you, because this is a broader endeavor. And I know Cynthia and Martha are trying to think about how some of this might key into future work, but really look at this tool and see where it fits. And I'm going to pass the baton to Cynthia, who I think is going to take us home from here. I want to thank you all I want to thank Christine and William and Annie, but thank all of you for great questions and engagement. So thank you. Cynthia?
So thank you, Brett and Annie, William, Christine. What a fabulous conversation. It's obvious that we need many more wonderful conversations like this. I want to also thank Martha and Ellie for helping make a smooth time for us to spend time together. And for all of you on this webinar, I just really invite you to lean in with us about the kinds of conversations we need to have. I'm sure your mind was spinning, as mine was, of all the different conversations we need to have based on just this introductory conversation. And so I welcome you using this tool that ESG has shared to help you with some of the things that you listed in chat. So we're going to keep this going. I'll just tell you that, our next institute is in November. So we will continue to have these conversations. We will continue to bring more people in. You remember from the first chat that there were more people in other. So this is our first chance to really put our toes in the water of saying we really need to have a bigger tent of who's involved in these kinds of conversations. And so we'll continue to do that. So with that, I just thank you for your time and for your great work. Texas has a great reputation for the work that you all are doing, all 50 of you committed to scaling guided pathways. So keep up the good work, and we'll be here to continue to support that. So with that, I just say thank you so very much for your time, and have a good afternoon.